The warm amber lighting of Corner Cafe cast a welcoming glow across the cozy coffee shop as 27-year-old Madison Parker wiped down the espresso machine for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she wore her favorite white tank top beneath the cafe's simple brown apron. The evening shift was usually quiet, giving her time to study for her business degree between serving the handful of regulars who preferred their coffee after sunset. Madison had been working at Corner Cafe for 2 years now, putting herself through college one latte at a time. She loved the peaceful atmosphere of the evening hours when the afternoon rush had died down and the space transformed into a quiet haven for students, writers, and people who simply needed a moment of solitude with a warm drink. Among her regular customers, there was one who particularly intrigued her. Every evening around 8:30, a man in his mid-30s would arrive alone, order a simple black coffee, and settle into the corner table by the window. He always wore casual clothes, jeans, and a dark sweater or t-shirt, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he was comfortable being alone with his thoughts. Madison knew him only as David. He was unfailingly polite, always. Said please and thank you, and left a generous tip despite ordering just coffee. But beyond these surface interactions, he remained a mystery. He would sit for exactly 1 hour, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just gazing out the window at the city lights, lost in contemplation that seemed both peaceful and melancholy. What Madison did not know was that David was actually David Harrison, the 34-year-old CEO of Harrison Technologies, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By day, he commanded boardrooms, made decisions that affected thousands of employees, and lived in a world of high-stakes business negotiations. But by night, he was simply a lonely single father seeking a brief escape from the pressures of his demanding life. David had discovered Corner Cafe 6 months earlier, during one of his late-night drives through the city. After putting his 5-year-old daughter Emma to bed at their mansion across town, David often found himself too restless to sleep, too wound up from the day's stresses to simply relax at home. The cafe had become his sanctuary, a place where he could shed his corporate identity and simply exist as an ordinary person for 1 precious hour each day. "The usual tonight?" Madison asked with her warm smile as David approached the counter on this particular Tuesday evening. She had already begun preparing his black coffee, having memorized his preferences over the months. "Please," David replied, offering the gentle smile that had become a familiar part of their routine. "How are your classes going? I remember you mentioning you had a big presentation coming up." Madison felt touched that he had remembered such a small detail from their brief conversation weeks earlier. "Actually, it went really well. Thank you for asking. I presented a business plan for expanding small coffee shops into community gathering spaces. The professor loved it." "That sounds fascinating," David said, genuinely interested. "What kind of expansion ideas did you propose?" As Madison handed him his coffee, she found herself sharing more details about her academic project than she had intended. David listened with an attention and insight that surprised her, asking thoughtful questions about market research, funding strategies, and community engagement that suggested he understood business far better than most people. "You really seem to know a lot about business," Madison observed as their conversation continued. "What do you do for work?" David hesitated for just a moment, a question he had been dreading but also hoping she would ask. "I work in technology," he said, which was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of his actual responsibilities. "That must be interesting," Madison replied, sensing his reluctance to elaborate, but not wanting to pry into his privacy. Over the following weeks, David and Madison's evening conversations became the highlight of both their days. Madison found herself looking forward to 8:30 each evening, when David would arrive with his quiet presence and thoughtful questions about her studies, her dreams, and her perspectives on everything from coffee brewing techniques to local community development. David, meanwhile, discovered that Madison possessed not just warmth and intelligence, but genuine wisdom about building authentic connections with people. Her insights about creating spaces where individuals could feel truly welcomed and valued resonated deeply with someone who spent his days in corporate environments where personal relationships were often superficial or transactional. What Madison began to notice, however, were small inconsistencies in David's simple story about working in technology. His clothes, while casual, were clearly expensive. His watch was understated but appeared to be worth more than most people's cars, and his knowledge of business strategy and market dynamics seemed far too sophisticated for someone in an ordinary tech job. The revelation came unexpectedly on a quiet Thursday evening. Madison was restocking magazines near the front counter when she picked up the latest issue of a business publication that someone had left behind. As she flipped through it absently, she stopped dead at a full-page photograph of a man in an expensive suit standing in a gleaming corporate office. The face was unmistakably familiar, but the context was shocking. The headline read, "David Harrison, the visionary CEO revolutionizing enterprise technology." Madison stared at the image, trying to reconcile the powerful executive in the photograph with the gentle, soft-spoken man who came to her cafe every evening for simple black coffee and quiet conversation. At that moment, David walked through the door for his usual 8:30 visit. Madison looked up from the magazine, her expression a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hurt at the deception. David saw the magazine in her hands and the recognition in her eyes, and his face immediately showed both resignation and fear. He had known this moment would come eventually, but he had hoped it would happen after Madison had gotten to know him well enough to understand why he had concealed his identity. "I can explain," David said quietly, approaching the counter with obvious apprehension. Madison set down the magazine and looked at him directly. "You are David Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Technologies." "I am," David admitted, his voice carrying both relief at no longer having to hide and worry about how this revelation would change their relationship. "Why did you not tell me?" Madison asked, her tone more hurt than angry. David was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Madison, in my world, people often see my title and my wealth before they see me as a person. When I come here each evening for 1 hour, I get to be just David, someone who enjoys good coffee and intelligent conversation with someone who treats me like a normal human being." Madison studied his face, seeing the vulnerability behind his explanation. "So this whole time, you have been testing whether I would treat you differently if I knew who you really were?" "No," David said firmly. "I was not testing you. I was protecting something precious to me. These conversations we have, the way you smile when I walk in, the fact that you remember details about my life and ask about things that matter to me, that is real. And I was afraid that if you knew about my position and my money, all of that authenticity would disappear." Madison felt her initial hurt beginning to transform into understanding. She thought about their months of conversations, about the genuine interest David had shown in her dreams and ambitions, about the way he had listened to her ideas as if they truly mattered to him. "David," Madison said finally, "I need to tell you something. I do not care if you are a CEO or if you work in a warehouse. What I care about is that you have been kind to me, that you have encouraged my dreams, and that you have made my evening shift something to look forward to. That is who you are to me." David felt a weight lift from his chest as he realized that Madison was choosing to see him as the person he had revealed himself to be through their interactions, rather than judging him based on his public identity. "There is something else. You should know," David said. "I am a single father. I have a 5-year-old daughter named Emma. and she is the most important thing in my world. These evening visits to your cafe happen after I put her to bed each night." Madison smiled for the first time since discovering the magazine. "I would love to meet her sometime, if you think that would be appropriate." 6 months later, Madison was managing her own cafe, a venture that David had helped her finance and develop using the community-focused business plan she had originally created for her college presentation. Emma had become a regular fixture at the new cafe on weekend mornings, charming customers with her bright personality, while Madison taught her how to arrange pastries in the display case. David had learned that true wealth was not measured in stock options or quarterly profits, but in finding someone who valued his character over his credentials and who loved both him and his daughter for who they truly were. Madison discovered that the most successful partnerships in business and in life are built on genuine respect, shared values, and the courage to be authentic with each other, regardless of what the outside world might think about the differences in their backgrounds. Their evening coffee ritual continued, but now it took place in Madison's cafe, where David would arrive each night not as a lonely executive seeking escape, but as a man coming home to the people who had taught him that the greatest luxury in life is being loved for exactly who you are beneath all the external trappings of success.